there may have been significant effort to stay there. That it's a blessing to have seen and felt what I felt, even if I didn't fully understand where I was.
Welcome to Prioritize Your Life and PrioritizeYourLife.com. I'm excited today to be meeting with Travis Shreeve.
Excited to be here.
I know that you've had an experience, but I know honestly nothing about it. That's what I know, is that you've had an experience. So it's kind of how I like to keep it. So.
Awesome. My experience started, it was a tax season. I'm an accountant. I was very overweight at the time, and it was an extended tax season because of COVID, and so it extended into May, and I had just been sitting there working, eating, really nothing physical, and it was peak COVID. Hospitals were kind of overrun, and I was a little detached from maybe my health status. I didn't realize I was as unhealthy as I was at the moment. I'd never had real problems. I have asthma, but it's never been really a problem at all. So, but anyway, so I had COVID. I knew I had COVID, and it got pretty bad. And my wife took me to the emergency room. Everything was okay. They gave me oxygen. I slept and had oxygen, and had a really kind of a weird weekend. I don't remember much. I watched a lot of TV, watched movies, and slept a lot more than I ever have in my life. But I started to feel a little bit better on Sunday evening. My wife was getting a little impatient with me. She had been really taking care of me a lot. And she had kind of expressed that frustration. And I thought I was doing better. So when I said this, it wasn't totally honest, but I kind of gave her a guilt trip. I said, what if this really is bad? What if I don't make it? And it was true, but I didn't think it was true when I was saying it.
Sure.
But I just said, I need you to be patient with me. What if this was terrible? What if this gets really bad? And she felt a little bad, and that day I was feeling better. I started feeling better and better, but we still knew that it was serious enough that we had an appointment scheduled the next morning, and my wife had called my mom. She was going to come and get the kids, and we were just going to go. It was Monday morning. It was May 17th on an extended tax deadline, and I walked downstairs, and it was a lot of effort to get down the stairs. And I said to my wife, how far away is my mom? And she said she just left Sandy, which was about 25 minutes away. And I said, I was really struggling to breathe, and I said, call an ambulance. There was kind of a piece of furniture in our hallway. My wife had just camped out with the kids in our living room the night before, and so we had some furniture in the hallway, and I just kind of positioned myself above the couch and just kind of fell into the couch. I remember little bits of the ambulance ride, but really not much of that. My mother did arrive eventually, so my wife left the kids with her. She came to the hospital. The thing I had told her the night before was this dumb guilt trip that I maybe didn't mean at the time. But I left her with this guilt trip, but I almost left her with something worse, because when she arrived at the hospital, now I don't remember this, in my defense, I don't remember this, but she came up to me, and I had things on my chest, I had a bare chest, and they had sensors all over me, and I don't remember this, but I said, I pulled the oxygen off my mouth and said something, and she came closer, and she said, what was that? And I said, did you come to see my nipples? And at that time, because of the seriousness, my wife thought that those were going to be my last words. Obviously, they're not. I'm here.
Yeah.
But she thought those were my last words, and she was a little bit furious. But immediately after that, they put a tube down into my lungs, to give me air, and I really violently reacted to that. I don't remember any of that, but I violently reacted to that. And this was about the time where people were really becoming aware of intubation and the seriousness of that. And the word was moving around the neighborhood quick. Frankly, moving around the world quick. I have a lot of friends, even in the Philippines, that kind of knew of my situation. And the word was moving around, and the consensus was mostly he's going to die. There were not a lot of people that coming out of intubation at that time. But I'm religious. My next door neighbor came over. He's the bishop of our faith, and he gave me a blessing, and he felt inspired to say, to bless that I would survive this if I would fight. But he felt there was a big if there. It just felt really, he went back home and just told his wife, like, I said if, there was if in there. And just, he didn't understand why, but he just felt like that was so contingent and really, really worried. My father had just seen me violently react to that, and while they were still in the hospital, my dad said to my wife, he said, you need to tell the kids. And she said, tell them what? And he said, you need to tell the kids he's not going to make it. He was that sure. I was in this comatose state, but they all continued to pray for me. While I was in this comatose state, I was a little more aware than I would ever want to be. And what that meant is that I was seeing the nurses come in. I was very aware of them. They were coming in, they were looking at me, they wouldn't talk to me. I thought that because talking is so second nature, I thought that I was able to communicate with them, but I wasn't. And they were just ignoring me. And I just felt that something was dangerously wrong. And that basically that week and a half felt like 3 months. I as soon as I was able to speak, it felt like I was there for 3 months, and it was the most terrifying thing of my life, times 10. I was fighting to breathe. If I had understood, I could have simply said, this machine is breathing for me. But I fought and I fought and I fought to breathe. And there was a point at which I really wasn't able to do things on my own, but there was a point where I felt such exhaustion that I just felt like this is my last breath. This is my last ounce of energy. This is my last breath. And I gave my last bit of effort, and I was alive. And it was sad. It was terrifying to think that I was still alive, still a little bit aware, not able to communicate or anything like that, but I was still a little bit aware. And I was in such a dark place, feeling like they didn't care about me, like they just wanted me to die. And I thought, why can't they just let me die? Why can't they let me die now? Why are they extending this? And I, for moments there, I thought, if I could get up out of this chair, I would find a way to die. And kind of at the last minute. Now I don't necessarily believe this way, but I thought if I were to not fight, I thought I'm gonna go to hell if I don't fight. And I don't believe that way. But at the time, I just was in such a crisis that I felt like I was facing hell. Like that was the thing that was in front of me. And I felt this overwhelming guilt that I would be leaving my children, but also just felt that there was no way that I could escape this situation. But I felt like I was there for months, and I felt like it was so dark, and yet at the brink of just devastation, I was just somewhere else. I was somewhere else. And every moment in the hospital was disastrous. I couldn't understand why they would inhibit my breathing. It was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. The nurses were great, doctors were great, but I didn't understand that. And so every moment was dark until it wasn't, and until my body was so weak that I was elsewhere. And I found myself elsewhere, and it was beautiful. It was white and it was clean. And my first thoughts were, now I don't think I was allowed to understand where I was at, but my first thoughts were, this must be, this must be virtual reality, because I've never seen a place that looks this clean and smells this nice and is this well built. I was in this building that it was as if it had been molded, 3D printed out of a pearl element, and light just kind of escaped from every surface. There was no light bulbs, but there was light everywhere. But the thing that told me that this was not Earth, basically, was that it was so clean. Everything was just flawlessly clean. There wasn't a single problem, a single scratch in anything. Everything was so perfect in this other place, and had this strong feeling that it had been connected. On my behalf, it had been connected. This way had been connected, that I was there. But at this time, I had totally forgotten that crisis, that what felt like a months long crisis. I had totally forgotten about that. And I just sat in this place and admired the beauty. And for a time I knew there were two people. I don't know why I knew there was a second person, because I didn't see a shadow. I didn't hear anything. I just knew there were two people. One of those people I could see, and it was as if, for a time, it was as if there was kind of a separation between her and myself. But I saw her and felt no impatience. I just was in this place, and for the first time ever, time didn't matter. I didn't feel an urgency to do anything, to speak to anybody. I just was in this place and felt totally calm. And eventually this woman who was there, she approached, and our interactions were beautiful. I immediately felt like I knew her. And for a moment there, I thought about asking her name and asking the name of this other person that I was aware of. And real quickly, I was kind of embarrassed. Like, I know this woman. How can I ask her name? And so I didn't ask the question. I just adored this woman. I just looked at this woman and just could not get over her beauty. But I felt this massive feeling of love that I've never felt on this earth. And even before she approached, I just felt that love. I felt overcome with love and understood that this was a special place. We continued to interact. Much of it, she wasn't speaking. I didn't see her mouth move, but I almost always heard a voice. And then in some of it was like information was downloaded. I immediately understood that this woman was very interested and very concerned about my children. It just meant a lot to me, and I understood that she was a very important person in my life. To the point that when I was back in the hospital, I tried to explain it fruitlessly. I really struggled. but I felt that closeness, and I felt a love for her, and I felt an absolute adoration of this woman. There was a power that she was taking care. She was taking care of so much in my life. But she, at one point, she finally had to tell me, hey, you are in the hospital dying. She had to tell me that, because where I was, that had no meaning, that had no importance to me. That had, all those worries were just gone. The really poignant thing about that is I had never experienced something so awful in my life. You know, to be fighting to breathe and not understand that the machine is breathing for me, but to fight and fight and fight and feel like I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. Why won't I die? You know, to that point, to where I was so devastated that I wasn't dying. But then to be somewhere where I had almost totally forgotten that that's the state I was just in, to feel such love and such beauty that I had to be reminded, hey, your body is in the hospital dying. That's how beautiful it was. But we went on and we interacted, and at some point she laughed at me. But it wasn't some offensive, you know, I'm right, you're wrong laugh, or you're an idiot laugh. It was, you know, I've got a 6-year-old kid who he'll be turning 6, and he says the silliest things, and I just hear those things and I just love him. I laugh and I love him, and it was that same feeling, that just like, I love you, you know, a little bit of, okay, you don't get it, but I love you. That's what the laugh felt like. And that's the one moment where I remember her mouth actually moving as, you know, as she was vocalizing anything. But she laughed, and in that laughter, I just felt absolute love coming from her, and just understood that she was such an important person in my life. Well, soon enough, I found myself back in the hospital, and you know, there may have been some signs that I was slightly aware in the hospital. They started to turn the TVs on, and it was a little bit horrifying, because once again I'm back in the hospital, and I'm under the influence of whatever it is to keep me in this comatose state, but I'm not totally there. And you know, they've got Transformers Dark of the Moon, which to me is kind of a horror movie now, because I was so helpless, and you know, even misunderstanding the premise of the film. And you know, there was even a point where, you know, I think it's no, it was a different movie, but there's John Malkovich in a different movie, and I wanted to tell everybody that I knew him, and then I realized, like, I can't talk to anybody. I can't talk. I wanted to send a secret message to John Malkovich. But I struggled. I was so, once again, even in such a silly atmosphere, just mindless movies, now that I'm back in the hospital, I'm in this state of just helplessness, and everything is a chore. Everything is I'm just struggling. And I'm just terrified. The nurses are doing the same thing. They're coming in, and they're leaving, and they're not acknowledging me. They're looking at my arms. They're looking at things in their hand. They're looking at the equipment, writing down numbers, but they're not looking at me.
So as far as they're concerned, you're just a vegetable at that point.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah. But I misunderstood it to the point that I thought that they wanted me dead.
Yeah.
Just, you know, misunderstanding. But so it got really bad again, and once again I found myself elsewhere. And it was a little bit more immediate this time, where she just said, everything's going to be okay. And this wasn't spoken in words, but this was as if it was downloaded to me, that she did say that in words, everything's going to be okay. But then she had spoken to me almost through downloaded information to say that she somehow intervened in my behalf. I don't know what that was, whether she, impressed something upon a doctor's mind, or pled with God on my behalf. I don't know what that was, but I came to understand that she did in fact intervene on my behalf. And I just knew it. I knew that everything was going to be okay. I knew that she loved me. I knew that she had intervened on my behalf. And that was enough. So for that interaction, that was about it. And I soon found myself back in the hospital. And in the hospital, nothing changed. It was still this misunderstanding of what was going on. But I knew, I don't know how to explain it, but I knew the truth of what she said. And so even though I still misunderstood what was going on in my mind, I just knew that she had found a way out for me and that I was going to be okay. And a little bit of time passed, and I just had that confidence. The struggle with the nurses, they don't care about me, but she has come through for me. I was becoming more aware, and they were able to speak with me. I was able to mumble some things and communicate a little bit. And there was one part where I still was in not a very lucid state, or not a state where I could speak very well. And one last time I was shown an image, and it's like I wasn't allowed to fully remember this image, but in that image there was my family, and there were a couple of other individuals there, and she spoke to me one more time. I was in the hospital. This was my only moment of peace in the hospital, but she spoke to me one more time, and she said, everything's going to be okay. We will be whole again. And I felt something special about that. I felt something special even in the way that image had been showed to me, that there were even colors that were, specific and special to me. And but at the same time I thought, okay, this lady's great, but why we will be whole again? Why? And in my misunderstanding, I started thinking around, and I actually started worrying. I thought, okay, when I get back home, once I get out of this, we need to open up our basement, and we need to let this woman come and live in our basement. This was more real than anything, and it felt like I had been living my whole life to get to that place. Like now that they had connected, now that things were connected, I was there, and it had even been told to me, kind of downloaded to me, that I would be back there soon enough. And sometimes I unfortunately think that soon enough isn't as soon as I want it. Not that I have any desire to speed up this life too much or anything. I do sometimes feel like maybe it was soon enough in their terms, meaning that once I go back, it will feel like a blip. Just like that crisis I experienced in the hospital was such an unimportant thing as soon as I was there. But I was back in the hospital, and things, it was rough. My hospital stay was tough. I knew the nurses cared. Everything was improving in that stance, but I was in a lot of pain. they had these containers to capture, you know, if I coughed up blood or anything, and I had a little sucker, and I think I had filled something up that big twice, you know, in the next week within the hospital. And if it hadn't been peak COVID, they probably would have kept me there another 2 weeks. But because it was peak COVID, they were kind of like, you're alive, let's throw you on a wheelchair and get you home. And no, they made the right decision. I'm not saying they didn't, but I think they would have made a different decision if there weren't so many people hospitalized at that time. But I went home and really felt sorry for myself. And part of that feeling sorry for myself was I tried to understand what I had seen, and I tried to, through the lens that I had viewed it. And I truly think that I was absolutely not allowed to understand where I was. Or else it would have been kind of like a mindless guess. Like, of course I was in the spirit world. Of course I was on the other side. It was stereotypical, right? There was, even in the distance, there was a little bit of haze, a cloudy haze. And it just, if I could present that image to somebody, they would say, oh, this guy is presenting an image of heaven or of the spirit world. Because it was more beautiful than anybody could have ever presented it. I think that that possibility had been taken from me. And so as I tried to understand what had happened, I was mostly confused by this woman. And I thought, okay, who is she? Is she a neighbor? I know she takes care of my kids. I know she loves my kids. Who is this woman? And that was such a great concern to me, is finding this woman. And so I felt a little bit confused. I was in a lot of pain, and I struggled to breathe throughout this. And so the next several weeks at home, I would wake up 40, 50 times in a night, just in a panic of, I can't breathe, I'm dying. I can't breathe, I'm dying. And I always had somebody by my bed, my wife, my mom, my sister. You know, they were always there, and it always felt like an emergency to me. So I had several weeks that I kind of departed from focusing on what was important. And it wasn't until I began to heal a little bit, I was able to finally walk upstairs. They made a bed for me on the main floor, but I was finally able to walk upstairs, and I had a really good sleep. And by really good, I mean about 4 hours of sleep. But I slept about 4 hours, and I woke up feeling really refreshed. And I wasn't in tremendous pain, but I woke up feeling really refreshed, and I had my oxygen connected to my nose, and I kind of walked into our master bathroom, and I just, with all my energy, went and kind of sat on the floor, just because I didn't want to wake my wife up. But I felt like there was something I needed to know. And I sat there on the floor, and I thought, okay, what is it? What do I need to know? I nearly died. What are the things that I need to know? And I started kind of making a list in my mind of all the things that I should be better at. And I thought I should work less. I should spend more time with the kids. And really thought of the best things that I do, how I could be doing them better, and the worst things that I do, how I could, stop doing those things. And the impression kind of came to me, no, that's not it. And I thought, of course that's it. I about died. I need to learn something. And the idea, that's not it. And as I sat there on the floor, the image came back into my mind. Not the individual image that was showed to me, but I basically relived that interaction with this woman. And keep in mind, during these weeks, I never could get that woman's image out of my mind, particularly her voice and most particularly her laugh. That laugh is the most singular, beautiful memory of my life. And there's even a neighbor, not a neighbor, she's an old friend, and she has just a very slightly similar voice, and I could go my life without ever seeing her again, because her voice was just similar enough to this voice that I heard, that I thought, I don't ever want that voice to take away from this voice that I heard. Kind of silly, but I relived this memory, and I heard her voice again, and it hit me, this image, this woman's face who had been on my mind this whole time. It immediately became clear to me that this was family, and this was my mom, and this was my wife, and this was our daughter. This was, I could see some characteristics from my side and from my wife's side, and I knew immediately that this was my daughter. And I didn't want to wake up my wife, but I started messaging her at that time, and emailing my mom as well. I knew that my mom and my wife would be interested to hear this, but I had talked to my wife about, I had called the place something. I had called it Avonlea Way. I don't even know if that's what I said, but that's what she heard. And so she had jotted some things like that down in her journal. But I saw a place. I did see a place. And I tried to explain it as if things had been connected. But it was at this moment that I realized everything that I had seen. I had seen my daughter. My daughter, Whitney, had passed away at 16 months. And this beautiful woman that I was speaking to was my daughter. And it all made sense. It made sense that why I wasn't allowed to know where I was. It made sense why my next door neighbor was concerned about that if. Like, why that there was even an if that I would fight. It made sense that I wasn't allowed to know her name or who she was, because for a lot of years, and my last memory of Whitney was the doctors trying to resuscitate her. We knew she had a shortened life. She had a genetic condition, but my last memory was it was not a beautiful memory. And so often as I thought of Whitney, that's what I saw. And to be there in this woman's presence, and I felt all those same feelings that a father would feel to his daughter. When I looked at her and adored her and stared at her, it was all through the lens of a father. It was, even when I was in the hospital, I thought, why was it okay that I just looked at her like why was it okay that I just adored this woman? And it all became apparent that all those interactions were the same. A father to his daughter, just, as if you hadn't seen your daughter in all those years, and all of a sudden your adult daughter is there and you just adore her. You're so happy to see her. Those feelings were all as if I knew, except I didn't. And this all came back to me. This all, I just had realized this at that time. And I also realized why she said what she said. She said, we'll be whole again. And it made perfect sense. It made perfect sense. And the one other item, so we lost Whitney at 16 months, and we lost our son Vincent with the same genetic condition at 8 years old. And it was clear to me, just clear as day, that there was a reason I was allowed to know this man was there, but I was not allowed to see him. Vincent.
You would have recognized him probably, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He was a little healthier. He was a little healthier, and he looked a little bit more like us. In fact, I have a son now who looks a lot like him. Somebody just walked into the house the other day and said, "Why do you have a picture of just Raymond?" And Raymond's sister said, "That's Vincent." And she said, "I don't know Vincent." But the beauty of that I was able to see things, but even if a little bit was taken from me. And part of the beauty of that is the importance of sticking around, because if I had seen what I saw and I knew what I was seeing, there may have been significant effort to stay there. There may have been effort to stay there. And I feel that it's a blessing to have seen and felt what I felt, even if I didn't fully understand where I was.
Oh man, just any story about parents and losing your kids, that just, first of all, I have 7 kids, and just that alone, that you and your wife have had to go through that's really hard. And I can't imagine there's a lot of parents that have gone through that. But what a beautiful reminder. And I think it's kind of interesting too. I don't know that a lot of us necessarily think about the age of maybe our souls, but sometimes in fact, my own mom, she always would say to me that she thought I was a lot older than her. She's like, "I think you've been alive for eons before you came here." And I'm a very spiritual person too. And at one point I had someone kind of say a prayer over me, a blessing. And they said that very thing about me that my mom had said, not having known that.
Yeah.
But that's a beautiful reminder for any parents like you that have lost their child, to know that they are still there. And not only are they still alive, but they're very aware of you. What a beautiful thing to think about. Even your children that have passed, that they're just there, just waiting for you and aware of you and what you've gone through.
Yeah.
That is just beautiful.
I've always been a believer, and I've always felt like they were in good hands, but I maybe erroneously felt that they had better things to do than to spend time worrying about us. But that feeling of just that love and concern for me, but especially for my kids. I've always felt a little ripped off that my younger kids didn't know Whitney and they didn't know Vincent, and yet to have that overwhelming feeling that more than myself, she has always watched over her siblings, and also that bond that, I think as a kid, I always, I grew up, there was probably some movie star like Andy McDowell, right, who was kind of the epitome of like a beautiful, kind person. And somebody that looks like Andy McDowell could have talked to me, but to have somebody that looks like me, particularly where my daughter was very disabled in this life, an enlarged head, very, very skinny, a lot of veins. She was very disabled in this life. And to see somebody who looks like me and looks like my wife, it's just the gravity of that and the meaning of our decisions in this life just is overwhelming to think about. That although that place seems so just infinite and beautiful compared to this, the decisions, the things that we do here still have an effect in the long term. But also, as you said, as I sat there, I adored her, but there was also a reverence to her. And it, in many ways, it felt like I was speaking to my, for lack of a better word, my superior. It felt like I was speaking to somebody who was an older soul than myself. she looked 30, but in a lot of ways, she just, every word she spoke and every concept downloaded was just powerful to me. And to understand that there was some place where she had intervened, I knew there was a power there. It wasn't just a simple task, but there was some enormous power.
Yeah. Going through the experience that you've gone through, not all of us will have those experiences, and so we kind of have to lean on faith of knowing whether or not the afterlife is real, whether or not we get to see our loved ones again. Maybe what advice would you have for people that are just literally just like struggling with this life? Because I love what you said, that our decisions matter, and I really think that's true. And even just you explaining this, it honestly, I had this like spark go off inside of me of like, something I'm always trying to do is be a better father, but like you can still see, like, there's still a lot that I could do better, because man, these important souls are under my care. And I think sometimes we can almost get complacent with that responsibility and we lose our temper. And how dumb is that? I mean, they're so important and special, way more than whatever silly, trivial thing that might upset us in that moment. But yeah, maybe just any final thoughts that you might have on kind of maybe enduring some of the difficulty of this life, given your perspective as with this experience.
I think that's a really good question. And I think above all else, that would just be the advice, is to endure. And the reason I say that, now I don't want to compare my situation. I've had some tragedies in my life. And those, that week and a half that felt like months in the hospital, that felt like a major tragedy in my life. But simply the idea that as I crossed over, that was nothing to me. I had to be reminded that I was dying in the hospital. That's how insignificant it was. And I hope that that's the message that could go out there. I don't think it's, for somebody to grow up in the most horrid of conditions, I have this faith that as they cross over, they experience just tremendous beauty, to the point that all of that can be forgotten. Now, it doesn't mean that we overlook those things. I feel a greater obligation to take care of people, to do the right things and to take care of people. But what I think the big difference is a trust in God, that as we fail and as we experience these crises in our lives, that once we cross over, those things can and will all be solved. That there are failures throughout life. And my kids had the best doctors, imports from Italy, because they were the best geneticists in the world. And those doctors failed. Great doctors, but they failed. And I just have this overwhelming feeling that that all can and will be made whole. And particularly the idea that my lasting memory with Whitney was that moment of crisis, that moment where they moved her little body too quickly. It's too quickly for us, right? We were just so scared, and then her life ended. And to have that last, final, most meaningful memory replaced with the memory of this just overpoweringly beautiful woman, that memory is totally replaced. The memory is still there, and yet what I think of now is very different. If anything, I'm slightly jealous, slightly jealous of her, but happy that she's there, and very much more aware that she's also here sometimes, and hope that when those times come that I need to be spoken to, that I'm a little more aware of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Travis. That's one of the things that really stuck out to me that you mentioned that just seemed so comforting, um, which I haven't personally heard before, when you just said, like, you didn't perceive time. And, you know, I'm in a moment right now where I'm trying to do so many things and trying to take care of my kids and trying to make sure that I can provide and that I can do all of the right things. And just that idea of like washing away time and that you felt no rush, man, that alone, like that in this exact moment, I'm just imagining that. I'm just like, oh man, that sounds so nice.
And I'm the same way. I'm just too stressed out all the time, too focused on the next thing.
Yeah.
And that it really is something. It really is something.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for sharing your beautiful experience, and I'm sure it's going to help plenty of people. So thank you.
Thanks.